Yeah, so let's talk about that. I'm going to ask each of you that. And let's start with you, Michelle. So when you ask the question, tell me a little bit about yourself. What are you expecting to hear and what are you not expecting to hear?
So when I say that, I like that question, but I try to tweak it a little differently because I don't want to know anything personal about you. I don't want to know your religion. I don't want to know your, I want to know your professional. So I want you to tell me about yourself professionally. So I'll say, tell me about your, why did you choose your particular major? Or, what I see on your resume that you did this, and this. Can you kind of walk me through that? Tell me a little bit about how you did that or how you did this. And I want to hear, about why you want this role and why you think you're a fit for the role and using your past experiences. I don't need you to tell me about, how your mom's sick and your dog died and that we don't need to hear about that stuff. That's personal. So I always like to tell candidates, I want to hear about your LinkedIn profile, not your Facebook profile.
That's a great way to,
we don't care about the Facebook. We want to know about the LinkedIn. And I think that especially when you're first interviewing and someone says, tell me a little bit about yourself, remember, you're not on a date, you're in an interview. And I think that'll help you kind of guide you on what to say and how to say it. And if you start going personal, it's okay. I'm just going to turn the conversation back to more of a professional thing. So just keep that in mind. When the employer says, tell me about yourself, think LinkedIn profile, think what I did at App State, what jobs I've had, what experiences I've had professionally.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's go to you, Matt.
Yeah, so the question, Michelle, is tell me about yourself. So I do like to hear a little bit about their hobbies and maybe an interesting fact. A lot of students or people that are interviewing are super nervous. So when I start off with tell me a little bit, I do a little bit of coaching on what I want to hear. And hobbies, get them talking about things they're interested in, and then an interesting fact about them usually gets the process started and kind of disarms them a little bit. I don't want to see that, I've been in interviews where they're super nervous and super uncomfortable. So I try to help coach them through that. And, like you said, Michelle, sometimes it's their first interview ever. So I try to be mindful and I try to think back when my first interview and how bad I fell on my face.
So it can be a time when an employer helps an interviewer get comfortable. That's true. I'd love to also hear, as the next two people answer, how long you expect that answer to be, because we often have our students go on for a very long time on that. Well, I went to elementary school so I'd like you to also to add that. Let's go to Sarah, then Jacqueline.
Okay. Well, usually I'll start by introducing each person that's in the room, and we'll kind of set the tone of, what we share so that they know kind of what to share. And the way I usually say it is, tell us a little bit about yourself. We're looking more from the professional side, but if you want to share hobbies or anything else, you're welcome to share. The worst response I believe I've heard is, well, there's not really that much to tell. And the reason, that, it could be because the person's nervous, but, as an interviewer, it may, make you feel like that person's got a lack of self-confidence or a lack of drive, that they don't really, that they're maybe lazy. I'm not sure. So make sure you have something that you can share from that regard. Being at Appalachian State, like Michelle said, is a wonderful way to start. And also, if you do your homework and you know a little bit about your interviewers, then, you might have something that you have in common, maybe a school that you went to or something like that. So you can always include that. But just know that these types of questions are ways that you can continue to build trust with those interviewers, because a lot of it is it's a trust-based type relationship that you're trying to build. So if you have gaps in employment, or if you have something that may be a question mark, acknowledge that and, explain exactly what it is during that time. Because that's a really good way to do that and help people start, because what an interviewer is doing is putting puzzle pieces together, because ultimately they want to know, if you're the right person for this role. And so use that to build trust with those interviewers. So that's my take on it.
And how long?
I would say 5 minutes. Go 5 minutes. If you start seeing the cues of, the shuffling of the interviewers or shuffling papers, that's your cue. It's time to stop.
Yeah, I would piggyback on that. I would actually say for your pitch, I would say maybe just a minute. And I typically ask candidates to tell me a little bit about yourself, walk me through your resume and tell me about your background and your experience. And I make it very clear that I'm looking for background and experience, and that I also have their resume pulled up. So I say this to every candidate: I have your resume pulled up here. Why don't you walk me through it? Tell me a little bit about your background and about your experience. And that way they know that I'm A, looking at their resume already, so they should have it pulled up too. And B, that I'm looking for those specific things. I'm not totally looking for your whole life story. And if you prepare that pitch ahead of time, that's even better. If you have 30 seconds to a minute to tell me, I started here, this is how I got to where I am today, this is what I'm skilled at, and this is what I'm looking for, I'm good.
Thank you. Is there any experience that comes to mind, or answer that comes to mind to that question that you want to share as probably the worst one you've ever heard?
I have a lot of people that take that question as a chance to unload. And that might be whatever's going on in their life, why they're looking. Some people are interviewing because they're unhappy at their job. I couldn't pick a specific one, but I have had several where 3 to 5 minutes in, I already know their entire life story, the troubles that they're going through, and why they hate their boss. And those are things that I really don't want to hear about.
Any other panelists have anything they want to share as a horrifying
More
story?
recently, I have heard my unemployment's about to run out, so I need to start looking. Lie to me. I don't want to hear that, because that shows me you're lazy. So it's fine. I mean, and a lot of you, are going to do your first interview. So, but just keep that in mind. Think about what would you want to hear and what you wouldn't want to hear. So that's a major turnoff for me. And I'm sure the other panelists would agree that it's bye. So.
Anything else from my other panelists on that one?
Oh, Michelle, I think you're muted.
Students, thank you. Students, feel free to pop anything in that chat that you want to have there for a question to be answered. I'm going to move on to behavioral questions. So we do a lot of prep with our students on the format to use when answering behavioral questions. Do you use them? And if you do, why or why not? And of course, what's a terrible way to respond to a behavioral interview question would be something I'd like you to follow up with. Let's start with you, Mac, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the behavioral questions. They're super hard to why I use them. They're super hard to kind of have the canned response. They have to think about the question. They have to think of how they might react to it. And I think, a terrible behavioral question response, that's tough. It's hard to just pinpoint one of them. I'll lean on my other panelists to give you some great examples there.
I guess I want to jump in here and say, students, a behavioral question is when an employer says, tell me about a time you demonstrated leadership. So it's not what you think you do when you demonstrate leadership. It's about a real life time that you did. So that's what a behavioral question is. All right, let's go on to Jacqueline.
Yeah, so there's 2 behavioral interview questions that I ask every time. And one is, tell me something that you've done so far in your career that you're the most proud of. And in that question, I'm looking for something very specific. I'm looking for either a problem that you've identified or a challenge you were given, the steps you took to overcome that challenge or solve that problem, and what the end result was. A lot of times I hear bits and pieces of that, which is okay, but I don't hear the middle part a lot. I hear, well, I was given this problem and I solved it. And I'm like, great, how did you solve it? Tell me more about that. Dig in, because I really want to hear kind of your thought process and how you get from point A to point B, and who you worked with, what steps you took. So I'm looking for a really specific answer there. And that's kind of a hard one. And I get a lot of stumped people on that, but after they think about it for a minute, it's a really good answer that I usually get. The other question that I always ask is, I wrote it down here, a time you made a mistake. And in this one, I'm really looking for honesty, because, I mean, raise your hand if you've never made a mistake. Right. So we've all done it. We've all been there. And at work, I've certainly made a ton of mistakes. I've had, well, I'm not going to go into how many, but I'm looking for some vulnerability here, and I'm looking for how you overcame that and what you learned from it is the most important thing. And sometimes I hear, well, I've never really made a mistake at work. That's not true. Or at school, or in my classes, everyone's made a mistake. I'm looking for you to tell the truth and tell me what you learned from it. If you tell me I'm perfect, I've written you off. Michelle, I think you're muted again.
You know what? I'm trying to remember. Sorry. Sarah, how about you? Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yes. So when we do ask behavioral questions, to me, it's really the highlight of the interview, because we do, like Jacqueline said, we want to see how you think, because we want to see how you're going to respond when you're in situations in our organization, because each employee is going to be a representation of who we are as an organization. And so really vague answers don't go very well. For example, in your question, when you say, tell us about a leadership, time that you showed leadership, if we get an answer, and we get this often, well, I show leadership every day, or I think leadership is the key to success. I mean, that's great, but it's not telling us anything about you. The other thing is, we have this, we have like an empty box, so to speak, when we're interviewing somebody, and during the interview, you're wanting to fill that up with. So by the time the interview's over, you want to know a little bit of who that person is. And if you just keep giving those vague responses that you could have pulled from anywhere, we still know nothing more about you after the interview than before the interview. One thing that we teach is the STAR interviewing process, and that's a behavioral type way to respond. So you start out with the situation or task, and think about and have a few things kind of in your pocket to pull out for certain situations. Have a few ideas of stories that you could tell. Share that situation or task, the S and the T, then share the action that you took. And that shows the behavioral side, and then the results that you achieved. And I would also add one more that kind of goes with what Jacqueline said. Share what you learned from it and what you would do differently if you had another opportunity to do that same thing again. Because again, that shows awareness and accountability. And those are very, very strong leadership behaviors that we want to see. And so you can display those through the behavioral questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Michelle?
I hire majority of sales individuals, so we do use behavioral interview questions. And I always like to ask the question, tell me about a time when you weren't able to achieve something, and how did you handle that? What did you learn, and what did you do in that situation? And I'm looking for, it could be that you studied for an exam and you didn't do well in the exam. Anything, we all have that situation, because when you're out there in the field selling, you're going to hear no more than you hear yes. So I need to know kind of what did you do there? How did you react to that? And I always encourage candidates to think about their toolbox. And each tool is something that they have, that they possess. So I may say to them, you know, what's in your toolbox? You know, tell me what's in your toolbox. Tell me what your strengths are, you know, that make you who you are. And I think that, and I want to hear, like everyone else has said, that honesty. I don't want you to just give me a canned answer. I want you to answer how you would answer.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, so what you just heard is all the employers use behavioral interview questions. So students preparing for those and practicing for those are going to be key. I have a question for the panel. Panelists, it says, interviewers, what changes have you seen in dress? Are younger generation candidates dressing more casually for interviews? Do interviewees that dress more professionally stand out more, or does that choice in dress have any effect at all? That's a good question. Thanks, Allie. Who wants to take that one? Sarah, let's let you take that one first.
I've seen dress become a lot more casual since the pandemic. Even really nice, you know, clothing lines, you know, like that generally are professional, you know, your Gaps, Banana Republic, some of those that are kind of the nationwide, they have like a whole loungewear type focus now. So you can be casual at home while you're working remotely. You know, those types of things aren't generally in a professional environment, aren't generally accepted. It depends on the situation and knowing what the dress code is. But I would say here, virtually, we're doing more virtual interviews now than we've ever done. And I would recommend that you still dress professionally, just like you would if you were face-to-face in an interview. You still dress the same way on a virtual interview. I've had people interview in, you know, their college t-shirts and sitting, you know, with the headboard of their bed in the background, like sitting on their bed, and just, it's very uncomfortable because, you know, to me, that's kind of infringing on, you know, personal space. And so just be aware of those surroundings, and dress is a big part of that.
How are they to know what the dress is for your company to start with, though?
Ours, we send that out beforehand. We just send out our dress code policy. But I would say, even I tell people, because I work, I'm a part-time professor at NC State as well. So I tell my students that it doesn't matter even if you're going for a retail job, dress beyond the dress code. I mean, just dress professionally every single time you're in front of an interviewer. It doesn't matter if you're overdressed or not. It's better to do that than to be under and lose an opportunity because of that.
Thank you. Let's go to Jacqueline then. Jacqueline, what's your comment on the dress at this point?
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing as Sarah. It's always better to overdress than underdress. You want to, you know, give your best first impression. This is exactly what that is. It's the same thing as you would say for a date. You're going to wear your best outfit, your newest outfit, something that you feel comfortable in. Even if you are on a video or virtual interview, it's better to overdress. And one thing I will say about the virtual interviews, because this has happened while I've been on a virtual interview, wear pants, wear real pants. Don't wear pajama pants, because inevitably something will happen. The mailman will come, your dog will bark, something will drop where you'll have to bend over and pick something up or stand up for a second. And if you're not wearing real pants, we're going to see it. I don't think an interviewer, you guys panelists can agree with me. We're never going to ask you to show us that you're fully dressed, of course, but I have had a situation where, you know, the FedEx delivery man came, the dog started barking, and they said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. 1 second, please let me just grab my dog and put him outside." It happens. We're all at home. That's not a big deal. What is a big deal is when you stand up and you're in your boxers. So just be mindful of that. I would say going into an office, again, overdress, you're making your best first impression. If that's not, you know, how the company dresses on an everyday basis, that's still okay. There are some things that don't change with the times. And I would say that how you dress for an interview is going to be one of those. Suits are highly encouraged, blazers, collared shirts, etc.
Thank you. Michelle, you
But
want to
mostly pants.
So it's funny you brought this question up because my niece is a senior and she's a Division I athlete, and she was, it was a particular Friday and she had practice in the morning, and then she stacked her virtual interviews at the career fair, and she had about 15 minutes to get home, and she was literally having a nervous breakdown. And I said to her, look, this is what you need to do. As soon as that virtual interview begins, say to that interviewee, thank you so much for meeting with me today. I am a Division I athlete. I did not have time to dress. And then the conversation starts, because Sarah and Jacqueline are absolutely right. I'm going to have an expectation that you are properly dressed for my interview. And if I see that you are not properly dressed, I'm going to question why. You had all day to prepare. But if you say to me, look, even if you're in your Chick-fil-A uniform and you say to me, look, I'm really sorry, I just came from work, I didn't have time to change, however, and then you knock your socks off because you know all about my company, I'm going to give you a pass. But if you're dressed sloppy, it doesn't look good. And like they all said, I always say, dress for the position you want, not the position you have. So if you want to be CEO, dress how a CEO would dress. And that really sets the groundwork. But don't stress yourself to the point of almost a nervous breakdown like my niece tried to do. And just be really honest with it, because I'm gonna get that. I'm gonna be okay with that. I'm gonna say, wow, this person's got a lot going on, but yet they're still dedicated and they were still prepared for that interview because she knew everything about the company and all of that. So it wasn't like she said that and then she goes, now tell me who you are again. No, she knew. So just keep that in mind too, that sometimes you may not be able to be as professional as you want, but try your best to do that. But please make sure if you're not, there's a reason, and tell us that reason. It's okay. We understand. We're all human.
Thank you, Michelle. Mac, what do you have to add?
Yeah, I'm still stuck on wear pants. Thanks, Jacqueline. So that's great advice. And I'll say, even if the company that you're looking to engage with has a casual workplace dress code, I still think you dress up for the interview. And then somebody touched on it too. Find a nice, quiet place for your virtual interview if that's the case, and then find a blank and or professional background if you can.
Or a virtual background. Even that is fine.
There you go.
Or look at behind Jacqueline, look at the blurred background. That would hide a lot of sins you didn't even know you were committing. But I am going to ask that question because we did practice interviews, over 250 practice virtual interviews in the last few days. And I saw some backgrounds where I wanted to stop the student and say, wait, I can see, you fill in the blank. What's the worst thing you've seen in the background that you wish you hadn't seen, so we can give students a little idea of what's not cool? Mac, you were enthusiastically nodding your head. Let's start with you.
Oh boy. And so this one did not happen to me personally, but it was a coworker. And speaking of coworkers, that's kind of what we call our family members in the virtual environment, our coworkers. This person had an interview, and one of their members in the household walked by, and they were wearing nothing. So we saw this individual saw the full moon, and so I think that's just reason enough to make sure that background is blurred. But yeah, that's the worst one I've heard so far. Outside of that, everybody's been pretty professional. I've seen some beer posters and stuff in the background, but I think I'm pretty forgiving on backgrounds overall.
All right, anybody else have one they could add so that students can learn?
I think inappropriate posters are very much a turnoff. Come on, you can blur your background like Jacqueline. You know, I do not like it. I've seen inappropriate posters of drug paraphernalia, like the pot leaf and the girly girls. No, I don't want to see that. You know, if you're
What
doing
about-
it at the
what
frat
about
house,
political things?
blur the background.
What about political things? Do you see political statements? Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you need to practice make sure the lighting is proper, make sure I can see you. You know, make sure that it's not really, really dark. And also too, especially with the pandemic, if you go to an area and you're unable to, you have to wear a mask, just tell us. I'd much rather see that if you're in the library doing the interview than I would you in your fraternity house with all your busy posters if you're unable to blur your background. You can also, I think a lot of schools, you can rent a room. You can rent like a space in the library. You can call the career center and ask the career center, excuse me, do you have a space I can use? That's going to come off a whole lot better than, you know, poor Max's example. I mean, that's, ugh. So just keep that in mind, you know, really practice with your camera. My niece called me and we practiced and she moved her camera all around and we changed her lighting and she was good to go. So it took us maybe 5 minutes. So everybody has a friend that can help them with that. So that's really important. You want to look as professional as possible so that when you're speaking, we're not looking at your background.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would add to that, the car. If you're interviewing from the car, similar to what Michelle said earlier about interviewing in your Division I athlete uniform, you know, if you have to be in the car, that's okay. If you are on a very strict lunch break or something like that, we get it, but you should preface that, because if you don't and say, you know, I'm so sorry, I have to take this from my car, it's the only quiet space I could come up with, I just assume that you're doing something in between, or this is something you're doing offhand as you're on your way to something else and you had to pull over. So just let us know if something like that happens. The other thing I would say, and I also would like to preface with this, my background is blurred because I'm reorganizing my closet at work. I don't have drug paraphernalia in the background or anything like that. Just reorganizing here. But if you do have a mess, if for some reason there's a mess in the background, couldn't clean your room, couldn't clean your space, just blur yourself, put on a virtual background. I don't want to see clothes all over the floor, or, I mean, I have boxes stacked up behind me. Just anything to make it look like a more professional environment, definitely helpful. Even if you want to put yourself in Hawaii, that's better than a mess or naked people in the background.
Sarah, do you have anything to add?
Well, I'll just add on to the story with the, you know, it's been more than one person that's done their virtual interview in their bed. I personally don't like that look. I just feel like that's a personal space. But in one particular incident, probably the weirdest interview I've ever had, it included having the interview in bed. But then there was connection problems and she had to take down my number to finish the interview by phone. And she couldn't find a pen, so she wrote my cell phone number in lipstick on her bedroom mirror. So that was very uncomfortable.
But creative.
That's one that sticks out. I mean, I know none of you on the call would ever think of doing that, but I thought that was something worth mentioning. I think my mouth dropped like.
The books you could write, all of you, really. I mean.
I want to add to what everyone has said also. Even after you get the job, it's still not okay to take meetings and phone calls from your bedroom. It's, I would say, even worse to take meetings from your bed when you're already employed. I had a coworker who was fresh out of college. She got the job. She's brand new. She was great. She was a huge asset to the team, but she took all of her meetings from her bedroom, and she had a adorable large pit bull. I will never say no to seeing your dog on camera, by the way. However, when we were in meetings, she had her large pit bull on the bed behind her, and he would rummage through her sheets and be laying on the bed with the bed unmade and the mattress out. So be mindful of that after you get the job too. You still need to find a professional space to work, even if you are just blurring your background, because if it's bad for the interviewer to see it, it's even worse for your coworkers to see it and have to have that image of your personal life all the time.
Thank you. Thank you. Students, feel free to put any questions in the chat. I'm going to go on to the end of the interview. So now we've finished, we're at the end, and inevitably you say, do you have any questions for us? What question do you wish students would stop asking or interviewers would stop asking? Who wants to take that one first? Michelle, you look so ready. Go for it.
So I hate hearing, I don't have any questions. What do you mean you don't have any questions? You don't want to know the next step? You don't want to know my contact information? Because I'm not going to just give you my contact information. You're going to have to ask for it. Again, I'm looking for sales professionals. So I want to know how you're going to do your quote unquote close. So you should always have a close prepared. And the simple question could be, what are the next steps? May I have when I have your information? Thank you so much for this interview. Are there any other questions you may have for me? Is there any, you could even, I've had students ask me, what are the next steps? May I contact you? Just come up with some kind of question. And you could also say, I had a list of questions. You answered a lot of them. I would, can you go over this again or something like that? You can all, just something, some way to end the interview, because it's on you to end that interview. It's not on me to end it. I'm not going to end it. If you say I have no questions, I'm going to say, okay, thank you. Have a good day. And we're done. You're not going to know who I am. You're not going to have my contact information. You're not going to have my email because I'm not going to give it to you.
Right.
So the end is very important. So just as important as you have your elevator pitch in the beginning, make sure you have your elevator pitch in the end. And it could be 30 seconds. It could be a minute. Make sure you thank me and ask for my contact information. That's going to go a long way. And you can always come up with a question. I know it can be difficult, but you can, what are the hours? What are the expectations for this role? What is your ideal candidate? Just something.
Yeah, I would piggyback on Michelle. One question you can always ask, no matter if you're interested, not interested, at least just to make sure you have something to ask, is what would the ideal candidate look like for this role? What are a few skills that the person that would really knock this role out of the park have? Tell me how I could add value, or what this candidate could do to add value to this role. Anything, and really, even if it's vague, if it's the same question you ask every interview that you're in, at least you're asking something. I would say what I really don't like to hear at this point in the interview is, what's the schedule? It's okay to ask for compensation at this point if you feel like you're, if it's going well. But I don't like to hear, is this a Monday through Friday 8 to 5 kind of job? It's not something that has a lot of depth. We can talk through those logistics at some point if you want to follow that up with in an email, but I'd really like to hear questions about why you would be interested in the role, something that makes me think that you're ready for the next steps.
Go ahead, Beth.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, I just want to, Sarah, you want to go ahead? I'll go after you.
it's okay.
I just want to say this is a two-way street. And there's never been a better time to be coming out of school or to be in the job market. I think the numbers were 10.5 million jobs available, something like that. So if you're taking multiple interviews, this is your chance to really have the company sell you potentially on why you would want to come work for them. Now, maybe you can't just outright ask that specific question like, hey, why should I choose you, as a company, but have some questions ready. What are the things on your list that are important, kind of those non-negotiables to have for your company or your career or that role, and have those questions ready. Tell me about your culture. Those things are important. Is this I don't know if you can ask it, but have those questions ready that are the non-negotiables for the company that you choose, and be ready to fire some of those at the recruiter as well.
Thanks, Matt. What about you, Sarah? You're going to add something.
Yeah, I was going to add that I'm not a fan of people asking for compensation on the first interview or any other what's in it for me type questions. For example, I've had people in a first, because we generally do 2 interviews, and we tell them that up front. But we have people that want to negotiate paid time off and things like that before they even know that they're a fit for the job. And what it tells me is you're more interested in how much time you're going to be able to take off than actually knowing if you're going to enjoy the job that you're applying for. So I would hesitate to ask those questions. Like the group has said, there's plenty of time to ask those questions as follow-ups once you know where you stand and once you know whether or not you're interested in this role. But to me, the attributes of a really good question are things that help you determine the fit for the job. And if you do that, the interviewer is going to take that and say, okay, well, they have an interest in our role here versus what's in it for me. So I would stay away from the what's in it for me questions at the beginning.
Thank you. That all makes a lot of sense. And that's a difficult thing for new interviewers to do, understand and based on what you've given for information, developing new questions, or I think having some in your pocket is a great idea, especially if you're nervous. I'm going to go on to now the interview is over and they may have asked for contact information, or they may have come back to career services and say, hey, I had this great interview, but I don't know the name of the person, whatever. What do you want? What stands out to you after an interview is complete from students? What kind of response would you like to see? What would be perfect? And what's an example of something that was not so perfect and horrifying, perhaps? Sarah, I'm happy to start with you if you've got that.
So are you asking kind of a bad interview story?
Sure, I'll take that one because this is
Okay,
this is the last question we'll have time for. So things you want to share. I'd like to know what do you want students to do when they're done with an interview? How do you want them to follow up with you? And tell us about a time you had a horrible interview that you want them to avoid those things.
Okay. After an interview's over, a nice thank you goes a long way. And a thank you can be by email, or it could, the ones that send cards still, they're few and far between, so they stand out. So those are always nice to get, just a handwritten thank you. And proper follow-up, but not daily follow-up. And part of that's on the interviewer too, that we should set expectations and communicate properly. And not just leave you as interviewees hanging. So that's a two-way street. I know it can be a challenge, especially if you have a job, maybe multiple job interviews, and you've gotten an opportunity with another company, but you really want this company. It's really hard to stay patient. So just being able to communicate, but not overly. And as far as a bad interview story, I think one that stands out is a candidate, a recent college graduate that had her mom come to the interview with her. And I thought she was just going to stay in the lobby, but she started to walk back with us to the room to interview. This has been a couple of years ago. And it was very uncomfortable for me to ask her, if she would please stay in the lobby, but she had an expectation that she was going to go back and interview with us or sit in the interview room.
Did you hire that young?
No. That's something that each of you know already, that you shouldn't do that on the call today, but I just had to add it as, some of the unusual things that we see.
Thanks. All right, who else has a horrifying story to tell us? That's bad.
I would say some of the things that stand out for bad more than good, like Sarah said, the people who follow up and call and call and call, you have to understand that for certain roles, we're interviewing several candidates, and sometimes the process can take a couple of weeks or more. It is on the recruiter to set those expectations as far as timeline goes. But if I've told you, look, this is the beginning of our process, it may be 2 to 3 weeks before we've made a decision. I will follow up with you when I know next steps. Wait for those next steps. If it has been 2 weeks and you've heard nothing, maybe then it's okay to follow up. But I have had people who have called me every day, multiple times a day. And then the worst ones are the angry ones when they haven't heard anything in 4 days and you get some yelling on the other end of the call. It's okay to be frustrated, but that's not a good way to get your point across to the recruiter.
No kidding. Holy cow. Thank you. Michelle or Mac? Nothing for you, Michelle?
I mean, I think Sarah and Jacqueline have kind of nailed it. I really don't have anything to add. I have horror stories, but I think we all do.
All right, Mac, anything for you to add?
Yeah, I love a good follow-up email after the interview, and I think our hiring managers do as well. When it certainly stands out. I say we probably get 40% of candidates that send a follow-up email, and that certainly to me gives candidates a leg up. If we're in between a couple candidates, that might push them over the edge. I do have a handwritten thank you card that I got recently for an interview. So that's certainly more rare, but appreciated as well.
Thank you. And I see that Allie, who has a sales background, has asked, do you think employers should include compensation range in the job description, or do you prefer candidates to negotiate? And if so, what is the best time to discuss salary negotiations? Matt, go for it.
So I love negotiation, and we just started posting the majority of our comp or some of our comp in the job posting. So I think that's a good way to, some of the more experienced people who have expectations of higher compensation, it might steer them away, and that's okay. Try to find the right fit. And I think the time to negotiate, to answer that question, is when you get an offer. Not at the first interview. That's not the time to say, hey, I'm gonna, looking for this. Get through the process, get an offer in hand, and then say, come back and say, hey, I really want to come, work for your company, but I need, X or Y.
Thank you. Anybody else? We'll take one more, and then it's time for us to wrap up. I don't want to keep you guys past your time.
We
Michelle?
do not put salaries information in our job postings. But I think there's a lot of technology out there, hence Glassdoor is a good place to go to kind of look and see what the range is for that particular position. And then I will always let you know when I interview that first interview, I'm going to let you know because we ask desired salary, and I'm going to look at that and I'm going to confirm with you. I'm going to say, hey, you asked for $50,000 a year. This position pays $40,000 a year. I still may call you and have a conversation, and you need to be honest with me. And you need to say to me, nope, I can't do 40 because it's not going to be 50. That's what I'm telling you. I'm telling you the salary range is around 40K per year. So if you come back at offer and you say I need 50, it's dead in the water. So, make sure that you are, if you put in there negotiable or open, I'm going to ask you for a number. So, we do it a little bit differently, but I bring it up. I'm the one that initiates that conversation. So if it's not initiated by the employer when the first interview, don't bring it up. But I'm going to have that conversation pretty early on because I want to make sure that we're at least in the same ballpark. Because the last thing I want is me to say it's $20 an hour and you're expecting $40 an hour. So, just keep that in mind. It is somewhat of a gray area, I think. But I think with a lot of the technology out there, looking at Glassdoor, they kind of, not that I'm advertising or anything for Glassdoor, but they have a good platform where they kind of have some salary information out there that you can kind of use as a guide and use common sense. It's your first job. You're young. You don't have a lot of experience. Thinking you're going to make $6K in your first job, that's a bit of a stretch. That's a bit of a stretch. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you. Thank you. Employers, any last things you want to add before we go to the giving out of the gifts that you've all brought? Anything I missed? You wish students would know? Jacqueline.
There's one thing I would like to add. If the job sounds too good to be true, it is probably too good to be true. If someone is offering you a 6-figure salary out of school, there's a catch. I'm certain of it. If there's a make your own schedule, earn this much, there's a catch. Please read job descriptions. Please read company reviews. Please ask questions. You do not want to get roped into something that you can't get out of, or something that you have to put on your resume that you only stayed for 3 or 4 months, just be careful. Unfortunately, there's a lot of recruiters out there, and there's a lot of misguided companies or misguiding companies that unfortunately prey on young and experienced job seekers. And I would hate for any of you to fall into that. So if you remember anything from today, if it's too good to be true, it probably is.
And I would add to that you can always ask Career Services as you're interviewing with a company, because we have a lot of experience, and we actually have a database where employers are rated based on their honesty and integrity. So check with us. Go ahead, Michelle, you were going to add something?
That's a great point that Jacqueline just brought up. I echo that 100%. And a good question to ask the employer is, tell me about your company culture. Because, and if it sounds like it's, all roses and tulips and it's the greatest thing ever, If they are genuine about the company culture and say, for instance, if someone asks me about my company culture, I have a 5-minute spiel that I give. All of it's good, but some of it's, areas we need to improve. And that's why you're coming in to help us improve that. So just keep that in mind. That was great, Jacqueline. You said that and I was like, yes.
Thank you. I cannot thank our panelists enough for your time today. It's always great to hear. And actually, I always learn, and I've been doing this for 14 years. So thank you. Hannah, I'm going to turn it over to you to do our selection for door prizes.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you, panelists, for such insightful conversation today. It was really amazing to hear from you all. And thank you for donating amazing gifts that we can give out to the students who attended. So I am going to share my screen momentarily. But first, I'm going to put my email in the chat. We're going to spin the wheel. If your name pops up, please send me an email with mailing information, and then we can get those prizes sent to you. Michelle, can you remind me how many spins we're doing?
We are doing 3.
3. All right. All right, so congratulations, Sophia. Please send me your information via email.
Are we sharing what they've won?
It would be great if you. I don't have the list in front of me, but yes, if you'd like to share, that would be great.
I'll put ours in the chat.
Okay. If everybody puts in, if they know what they're bringing to the table, we have a surprise, which would be nice too.
All right, and then congratulations, Allie. You're the second winner. Please go ahead and send me your information as well. And then our third and final winner. And congratulations, Javier. If you want to go ahead and send me your information, we'll get that prize to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, folks. We really appreciate it. Students, you know where to find us in Business Career Services, and you will see all of these employers on campus this week. Please make sure you come to our in-person career fair on Thursday and Friday virtual career fair. There's a lot more to learn. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you.